So I want to start this morning with a little show and tell. This is my funeral home. I wrote it last September, just in case it has my smiling face on the front of it. I wanted to make sure that certain things happened in my funeral, and so there's a page of instructions to go with it. It will contain the last alarm service for a firefighter. I hope the bishop will be here. There should be lots of chair-jerking testimony. It'll be followed by the scattering of the ashes, and instead of an expensive container, I've chosen a chock-full of nuts coffee can to contain the ashes. So there's a little something for everybody in the service, and some of my favorite hymns. I hope you'll be there. Come early, get a good seat. It's going to be interesting. I wish I could be there, but you know, it is my funeral. So, if this makes you feel a little uncomfortable, then maybe you can better understand what Peter was going through when Jesus talked about the end of his life. And all of a sudden, he's no longer talking about the kingdom and the love of God and how things are different in the kingdom and healing and forgiveness. Now he's talking about betrayal, death, crucifixion, his trial. And they're not comfortable. He's trying to prepare them for what lies ahead, but they don't want to hear it. That's not why they're there. That's not why the crowds have followed him. That's not why they went off in the wilderness and forgot their lunch and he had to feed them. It was to hear something entirely different, and now the message begins to change, and they're uncomfortable. So Peter takes him outside, trying to talk to him privately. I can imagine what the conversation was like. You've got to tone it down. People are going to fall away. You need to preach something which is more uplifting than this. And Jesus' response to him is, get behind me, because you are no longer thinking as one who is following God. You were thinking according to your culture. You were looking at death in a completely different perspective. Because faith changes how we look at that transition from this life to the next. Our culture teaches us to look at death as something to be feared. And yet our faith says, this is something that is a gift from God. That moves me from this place, with all of its difficulties and stresses and problems, into another place, in which I'm in the mirror presence of God, in the arms of one who loves me. Our culture teaches us that death is the final chapter in life. That that's all there is. When you die, it's over. But our faith says it's just the beginning. We become new and different. The ultimate adventure. The ultimate journey. And for Jesus, death was a means to life. Death for us, for our salvation, ultimately because he loved us. He gave himself for us. So that transforms the entire experience of what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about defeat. He's not talking about the finality of death. He's talking about a transition which will lead to eternal life. Difficult, but he's going to prepare them for that. And he invites them to join and to invest themselves in his death. Take up your cross and follow me. He who would save his life will use it. We're no longer spectators and bystanders on the sidelines, but we are invited into Jesus' death and ultimately into his resurrection. So what Lent is about taking that journey with Christ, not as one who watches from a distance, but as one who travels with him. What Jesus says to us is, you don't have to have it all together and be perfect in order to follow me. Take up your cross, your life, with all of its burdens and stresses and challenges, and follow me. You can bring the totality of who you are to the cross. And Jesus said, My burden is easy, my yoke is light. He invites us to travel with him, to bring all of our lives to the cross. And then to let go of the things that we so dearly cling to, and often lead to an imprisonment of sorts, a kind of captivity, because we so tightly cling to them. He says, if you would save your life, you will lose it. Well, that's a pretty challenging call, a challenging invitation. One of the reasons that St. Francis is so beloved is that he looked at Jesus' words and tried as best he could to live them in his life. He was often a literalist, and sometimes that had to be modified. But of anyone in history, Francis is the one who seems to have earnestly tried to do what Jesus said. So Jesus said, do not take 2 tunics or 2 pairs of sandals. That's all Francis owned. 1 tunic, 1 pair of sandals. If he said, go sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me, that's what Francis did. There's a well-known episode in his life that has to do with his relationship with his family. It was born at a time in which there was a new and rising class of rich merchants. Up until that time, society had been divided into 2 classes, the aristocracy and everybody else. And if you were going to be an aristocrat, you had to be born into that family. You couldn't translate from one to another. In the 11 and 1200s, things began to change as a new merchant class began to emerge that had money. With that money came power and also prestige. Francis' father was a rich merchant in the town of Assisi. He was a cloth merchant at a time when it's now possible to produce cloth on a larger scale. He made a lot of money, had the prestige. Francis grew up in a privileged life. He had friends, he could go to parties, he could carouse, all the things that are open to a rich young man in the 1100s in Italy. When his city went to war with a neighboring city, his father outfitted him as a knight, bought the best armor he could, the best training he could give him, sent him off to battle. Francis originally had visions of achieving some glory in the military setting. But he was captured, taken prisoner, became sick, spent the duration of that war imprisoned, and when he got out, had a long time of recovery, which began to change his life. He started to awaken spiritually. Not long after that, there's another battle. People in the town of Assisi is joining in it. And Francis again goes off to war. Midway, he has an experience of God speaking to him and questioning who he was really going to serve. What king would he serve? What Lord would he follow? And so, having had this experience and the transformation that went with it, Francis turns around and goes back to Assisi, thinking that everybody would certainly be as elated as he was with this vision and this experience of God. We're going to find out when we get back. People look on him as a coward, as one who betrayed his town, left the battle, and did not fight. So he finds himself on the outskirts of Assisi, in a run-down old church, San Domenico. And again he hears the voice of God who says to him, rebuild my church. So Francis, always a literalist, looks around him, sees this decaying, worn-out old church, and decides he's going to rebuild it. Gets together some friends, discovers that he has to have resources because construction isn't cheap, even then. And so he comes up with a plan to go to his father's cloth warehouse, take some of that cloth, and sell it, forgetting to ask permission for that. So his father is very concerned about his son, angry because he's not taking up the family business, not taking up that legacy, not preserving the family wealth that had been trusted him, and he would have been expected to follow in his father's footsteps. He's abandoned that. He's stolen from his father. He's broken 2 of the commandments. Thou shalt not steal, and honor thy father and mother. And so his father brings him to trial in front of the local bishop. Well, Francis doesn't have a whole lot of defense, but he remembers what Jesus said. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And if you would save your life, you will lose it. And so he walks away from his former life in a dramatic fashion, renouncing everything that was an entitlement for him, including his clothes. Takes off his clothes, walks out into another life. He who would save his life will lose it. From that point forward, his life has changed and transformed. Well, I don't expect that any of us are going to go through that kind of dramatic transformation. And certainly when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, and if you would save your life, you would lose it, it could be intimidating. But perhaps we could take one step this Lent. Maybe we could get just a little closer to set something aside, to take up that burden and follow Christ. He who would save his life. Jesus invites us into the mystery of his crucifixion, into the wonder of God's love and that sacrifice for us. Not just to see it from a distance,